You will not need this. The Duke of Larkmere said it with the key already turning. It was the muniment room key, iron, 4 inches long, black with 200 years of hands, and it went round twice in the lock of a door that had not been shut in his lifetime. That is the estate office, said his wife. It is. The rent books are in there, the maps, every lease on the property. They are. Gideon dropped the key into his coat pocket and turned round. She was standing in the middle of the flagged passage in the gray traveling dress she had been married in 11 days before, with her hands at her sides, and the September light came down the passage behind her off the sea and made a hard white edge of her. Madam, I am going to be plain with you, because I have not the time to be anything else. The tide turns at 10:30 and I am on it. Be plain. You have the house. The house is yours entirely and you may do what you like with it. Order the dinners, turn out the attics, have the drawing room painted if you must, and send the bill to Prewitt in Ipswich and he will pay it up to £50 a quarter and not a shilling further. He was pulling on his gloves. He remembered the gloves afterwards and the way he had gone on with them. You will not go into the estate office. You will not write to a tenant or to the bank or to my cousin. You will not order so much as a load of gravel on Larkmere's account. If a man comes up the drive on estate business, you will send him to Mr. Vane at the Dower House, and he will deal with it. And if Mr. Vane is not at the Dower House, then the man may come back when he is. Honora Bligh. She had been Honora Bligh for 26 years, and had been a duchess for 11 days, and had not yet, so far as he could see, taken any pleasure in the change, looked at the locked door for a moment. "May I ask why?" she said. "You may ask." "Then I am asking your grace." Gideon should have lied. It would have cost him nothing. "Because my father left a will that required me to marry inside the year or lose the whole of it to my cousin, and the year was up on the 10th, and I married a shipowner's daughter out of Lowestoft whom I had met twice, and I have therefore paid for Larkmere with the only thing I had left to pay with." He picked up his hat. "You have the title and the house and £50 a quarter in my name. You have not bought the land. Nobody buys the land. It is not for sale, and it never was, and I will not have it managed by a woman who 3 weeks ago had never seen a marsh wall in her life." The passage was very quiet. Somewhere at the far end, Mrs. Rook found something urgent to do with a cupboard. "You are going to London," said Honora. "I am. There is a suit against the will. My cousin has put it into the ecclesiastical court, and it will take months, and it must be attended to, and it will be attended to by me, in Doctors' Commons, in person. I shall be back after Christmas. And if the marsh wall goes in November, it went in the year 11. Samuel Q. told me, 200 acres under salt water for 3 seasons. Gideon stopped in the doorway. He had not known that she had spoken to Samuel Q. He had not known that she knew Samuel Q's name, or the year 11, or that a marsh wall was a thing that went. "Then Mr. Vane will attend to it," he said, and went out to the horses. It would be 14 months before the Duke of Larkmere understood what he had turned that key on. 14 months before he stood in his own barn in front of 90 of his own tenants with his hat in his hands, and his voice gone, saying a thing that could not be unsaid. And by then, the woman he had told to order the dinners would have walked out of Larkmere's front door with 1 corded box, in the rain, on foot, having refused the offer of a cart. He did not look back at the house. He had a horse to catch and a tide, and he was 34 years old and had been the Duke of Larkmere for 9 months and 11 days, and he believed, as he rode down to the Staithe, that he had arranged his affairs rather well. The brig cleared the bar at 11, and he was in the Pool of London on Thursday. The first letter came on the 22nd of October, and it was from Fenton Vane. His cousin wrote a beautiful hand, small and open, the sort of hand that looks candid. The Dower House was damp, but he did not complain of it. The barley had gone in badly on the 8 acre. Old Widow Sad was dead, and her cottage would want a new roof before it would let. And then, at the bottom, in the same easy hand, Her Grace has asked me twice for the muniment room key. I have told her, as you instructed, that I have not got it. She then asked me for the key to the tithe barn, which I gave her, seeing no harm. I mention it only because she is asking a great many questions of the tenants, and the tenants are answering, and it is perhaps not to be wished that Larkmere should get the habit of being asked things by a lady out of Lowestoft. You know I say this in perfect goodwill. Gideon read it in a coffee-house in Chancery Lane, with the rain coming down the window and his dinner going cold, and he was aware of two things at once. The first was irritation, which was what he expected. The second was a small treacherous flicker of something that was not irritation at all, and which he identified, with some surprise, as pleasure. She had asked twice. He put the letter away and went back to the court. The suit was worse than his attorney had promised. Fenton Vane's proctor argued that the marriage of the 10th of September was a fraud upon the testator's intention. A marriage in name, contracted 11 days before the year expired, to a woman without connection, fortune or acquaintance with the family, and never a marriage in any other sense, and that the court should look through the form to the substance, and give Larkmere to the heir at law. Can he win it? Gideon asked. He can delay it, said the proctor, and delay is the cheaper weapon. He will keep you in London until the spring at least. I cannot be kept in London until the spring. Your Grace will be kept in London until the spring, or your Grace will lose the estate outright. Those are the two roads. There is no third. That was the 14th of November. The letter about the sea came on the 17th, and it was not from Vane. It was from Mrs. Rook, who had learned her letters late and wrote as if each one cost money. Your Grace, the wall went on Tuesday night in the gale by the sluice, and the water is in on the low marsh, and up the loke as far as Kew's Gate. Mr. Vane says it must wait for the spring for the price of it. Her Grace has gone down to look at it herself twice in the wet, and stood there an hour. She says it will not wait. I write because you said I was to write if there was anything. Gideon stood up so fast that he took the ink over. He got as far as putting his hand on his hat. Then he stood in the middle of his hired room in Norfolk Street with the hat in his hand, and did the arithmetic that a man does once and remembers for the rest of his life. 3 days down, 3 days back, and a hearing on the 21st at which his absence would be noted, and his cousin's proctor would ask the court, sweetly, whether his Grace found the matter of his own marriage worth attending. He put the hat down. He wrote to Prewitt, in Ipswich, and authorized £200 against the sea wall, which he knew even as he sealed it was about a fifth of what a breach like that would cost. And then, because he had said he would be back after Christmas, and he was not going to be, he wrote to his wife for the first time in his life. He got as far as Madam, and sat with the pen up for a quarter of an hour, and in the end wrote 4 lines about the weather in London and signed them Larkmere. He did not mention the key. There was a thing about Larkmere that Gideon had not told her, and he thought about it a good deal that winter in Norfolk Street. His father had borrowed on it £14,000 in the year 18 against the whole of the marshland and the home farm and the greater part of the park, and the bond had gone from a Norwich bank to a syndicate in the year 22, and Gideon had been paying the interest out of the rents ever since, and had never once got at the principal. It was why the marsh wall had not been rebuilt properly in 9 years. It was why the roof of the West Range had a bucket under it. It was why, when his father's will had come to be read, and had turned out to require a wedding inside the 12-month. Gideon had not had the luxury of taking his time about it. And it was why Fenton Vane was dangerous, which was the part that kept him awake. A man who sues in the ecclesiastical court is only trying his luck. A man who begins quietly buying up the paper on your land is doing something else altogether. Gideon had no proof that his cousin was doing it. He had a strong suspicion, an unreturned letter from the syndicate's agent, and the memory of Fenton at the funeral, standing at the graveside with his hat off, looking at the marsh. So he stayed in London. He sat in Doctors' Commons through November and December, while proctors read out the will of his father 4 separate times. He gave up the hired chariot and took lodgings a floor higher. He did not go to a single party, which the world found so unlikely that it was decided he must be ill. And every 10 days or so a letter came out of Suffolk, and he read them all in the order they arrived, and he began, he was not proud of this, to arrange his mourning around the post. Fenton Vane's letters were always kind and always the same shape. A little farming, a little weather, and then the sting laid gently at the bottom like a lump of sugar in the last inch of tea. Her Grace went down to the breach again on Tuesday with Samuel Q. and stood in the water to her knees. I am told she has asked Q what the wall cost in the year 11 and what it would cost now. I do not know what she imagines she can do with the answer. Mrs. Rook's letters had no shape at all, and were worth 6 of them. Her Grace has had the men in the tithe barn twice. She gave them beer. Cook is put out about the beer. She has been through the linen, and there is nothing in it. Your Grace, the moth has had the whole of the second press since your poor mother's time, and she has had it all out on the grass, and I am ashamed. Then, on the 4th of December, this. Your Grace, I am to tell you that Her Grace had Diggins the smith up from the village on Thursday, and had the estate office door took off at the hinges. She says she has not broke the lock, and she has not. The lock is whole, and the key is still your own. The door is stood against the wall in the passage. She is in there now with the rent books, and has been since 8 this morning, and Diggins has hung a curtain over the doorway for the draft. Gideon read it twice in the coffee house in Chancery Lane. Then he put his head back and laughed out loud, once, so that 2 attorneys and a man selling almanacs all turned round. And he sat there for some minutes with his hand over his mouth, in front of the cold window, laughing at his own front hall 2 days' ride away, and it was the first time he had laughed since his father died. He did not write and forbid it. He told himself there was no point, the door being already off. Her own first letter came on the 11th of December. He knew the hand before he opened it, though he had seen it only once, on a register. It was upright and unhurried, and there was not a single flourish in it anywhere. Your Grace, I have your 4 lines about the weather in London. The weather here has been worse. The wall went on the 12th of November over 11 rods by the sluice. Mr. Vane advised waiting for the spring. I did not wait, for the reason that the low marsh takes the salt in 3 tides and gives it back in 3 summers, and the tenants who hold that land are Q, Frostick, and the widow Cobbled, and none of the 3 can carry 3 summers. I have had it closed. It was finished on the 2nd of December. I enclose the account, itemized, with the receipts numbered to match. You will see it came to £311, 4 shillings. Mr. Prewitt paid 200 on your authority. The rest was found. I would rather not be asked how at present, and you are entitled to ask, and if you ask I will tell you. The men worked 11 days in the wet. Samuel Q. took no wage and would not be argued with. I gave the rest of them beer and a shilling above the day rate, which Cook considers a scandal, and Mr. Vane considers a precedent. I have been in the estate office since the 4th. The door is off its hinges and is standing against the wall in the passage. Your key is still your key, and your lock is still whole. And if you wish the door put back, you have only to say so, and Diggins will hang it in an hour, and I will send the books out to the passage and work there, because they must be worked at by somebody, and Mr. Vane has not opened them since Michaelmas. I found in the 3rd drawer a bundle of your mother's household books for the years 99 to 11. She was a very exact woman. I have learned more from her than from anybody at Larkmere. You told me I had the house entirely. The house has 91 acres of kitchen garden, orchard, park, and home farm attached to it, and I am proceeding on the understanding that a house includes the ground it stands on, and if that is a liberty, then it is one you may put a stop to in writing. I remain, Your Grace, your obedient servant, Honora Larkmere. P.S. You did not ask, so I shall say it once. I did not marry you for the title. I married you because my father's house failed in the year 23, and he did not live out that winter, and I was 26 with a black dress and no money, and you were the only door that opened. You have been honest with me about what I am. I intend to be worth rather more than that, and I do not require your permission to try. Gideon sat in the window of a hired room in Norfolk Street for a long time with that letter open on his knee. He read the postscript 4 times. Then he read the account, which was in a hand as clean as a clerk's, and which balanced, and in which every receipt was numbered and referred to, and which showed £111 4 under one word: found. He wrote back that night, and it ran to 5 pages, and he had to send out for more paper. He did not put the door back. They wrote to each other all that winter. It began as business, and stayed as business for about a month, which was as long as either of them could keep it up. She asked whether the 12-acre had ever been drained or only talked about. He answered with a map from memory, and got the ditches wrong, and she told him so. She asked what his mother had used to do about the orchard, since the household books stopped in the year 11. He wrote back 4 sides about his mother, and about the pears, and about being 9 years old, and sent up a ladder in a gale, and did not notice, until he sealed it, that he had not mentioned the estate once. On the 3rd of January, he signed himself Larkmere. On the 28th, he signed himself Gideon, and then sat looking at it for a while, and sent it anyway. Her reply came back with Gideon at the top of it, as though it had always been there, and one line at the bottom that he carried about in his coat for a month. The fog is bad here too. I stood on the sea wall on Sunday and could not see the water, only hear it, and I thought that is very like being married to you. He learned things in those letters that no lawyer had thought to tell him. That her father's house at Lowestoft had owned 4 coasting brigs, and had failed on the loss of 2 of them in one November, and that she had kept his books for him from the age of 19, which explained a very great deal. That she had gone through the Larkmere leases one by one, and found 11 of them out of date, 2 of them illegal, and one, Samuel Q's, never signed at all, so that a family who had held the same 40 acres for 3 generations had, in strict law, nothing whatever. That she had had Pruitt draw a proper lease for Q, and had signed it with her own name, having no authority to do so, and had written to tell Gideon this in a single flat sentence with no apology attached. That the widow Cobbled's roof had been done for £9, and the loan of a cart. That she rose at 5, like the household, and that Mrs. Rook had twice found her asleep over the rent books at midnight, with the candle burnt into the stick. That she never once, in 4 months of letters, asked him for anything for herself. He noticed that last one in February, and it kept him up. He went out that week and bought a shawl in Ludgate Hill, a good one, gray silk with a green stripe, and had it sent down by the carrier, and then spent 3 days in a state of low anxiety about it that he would not have owned to under torture. Her acknowledgment, when it came, was 11 words long. "It is the best thing I have ever had. Thank you, now the ditches." Fenton Vane's letters, meanwhile, had stopped being kind. By the middle of February, he had given up the farming and the weather and wrote only about her, and always in the same careful, wounded, reasonable voice. That her Grace had signed a lease she had no power to sign. That her Grace had abated 3 tenants' rents by £6 apiece against labour on the wall, a thing unheard of at Larkmere. That her Grace received Samuel Q in the estate office, with the curtain drawn across the doorway, which he mentioned only because the village mentioned it, and he would not have Gideon hear it from anybody else. Gideon burned that one and was sorry afterwards, because it would have been useful. Then, on the 22nd of February, in Doctors' Commons, his cousin's proctor stood up and changed the whole shape of the thing. "He is applying to cite her," Gideon's proctor said, coming out into the passage gray about the mouth. "Her Grace, to appear here in person and answer as to the nature of the marriage." On what ground? On the ground that it was a form and nothing else. Contracted 11 days before the year ran out, to a woman with no fortune and no connection, followed within a fortnight by the husband's removal to London for 6 months. He will put Mrs. Rook in the box, your Grace, and the maids, and Mr. Vane himself, and he will ask them all one question, and the question will be which bedchamber your Grace slept in on the night of the 10th of September. Gideon stood in the passage, with the black gowns going by on either side. "She would be torn to pieces," he said. "She would, and the county would have it inside a week, and it would not matter in the least what the court found afterwards. That is the point of it. He does not want a verdict. He wants her name in a newspaper." "Then stop it." "There is one way to stop it, and it is not a legal one." The proctor took off his spectacles and cleaned them. "Go home, your Grace." "I beg your pardon." "He says the marriage is a form. Very well. The court is not blind and it is not deaf, and it sits 4 times a year and reads its letters like everybody else. If the Duke of Larkmere is at Larkmere, keeping house with his wife, farming his land with her, seen at church with her, seen at his own audit with her, then the citation is an impertinence, and I shall have it struck out in 10 minutes, and Mr. Vane will look like exactly what he is." He put the spectacles back on. "If, on the other hand, your Grace remains in Norfolk Street through the spring, corresponding with his wife by post, then I must tell you honestly that his proctor's description of the marriage is also mine." There was a silence in that passage that Gideon could feel on his skin. "There is another thing," he said. "The bond, 14,000 on the marsh and the home farm. I want to know who holds it. I have written to the syndicate 3 times. And they answer that the bond was assigned in December, and that the assignee's name is not to be given out." The proctor looked at him. "Your Grace, if your cousin holds that paper, he does not need the court at all. He can wait for a bad harvest and foreclose, and the marsh and the home farm go over to him without one word being said in public. The suit may be nothing but the noise he is making with one hand." Gideon went back to Norfolk Street and stood at the window a long time. Below him, the lamps were being lit along the pavement, and the fog was coming up off the river the color of dishwater, and 200 miles away, if he had the geography of his own life right, it was blowing hard off the sea, and there was a curtain hanging in a doorway where a door should be. And a woman he had married in 11 minutes and had not seen since was sitting behind it with her feet cold, going through his father's leases. He had been in London 5 months and had won nothing. She had been at Larkmere 5 months and had rebuilt a sea wall. "Send my things down to the wharf," he said to the man, "and find out what is sailing for Lowestoft or Woodbridge or anywhere within 30 miles, and I do not care what it is carrying." "When for your grace?" "Now," said Gideon, "tonight if the tide will have me." He came up from the Staithe on the 4th of March at 9 at night, in rain, on a hired horse, having crossed on a collier brig that stank of Sunderland coal, and having been sick twice. There was a light in the estate office. He went in by the garden door like a poacher, along the flagged passage, and there was the door, his father's door, and his grandfather's standing propped against the wall with a sack over the top of it to keep the damp off the panels, and a curtain of green baize hung across the empty frame, and the light coming out under it. Gideon pulled the curtain aside. Honora was at the estate table with the great rent book open, and both hands flat on it, and a shawl over her shoulders, gray silk with a green stripe, and her hair coming down on one side. She had ink on the second finger of her right hand. There was a plate at her elbow with a cut of bread on it that had plainly been there for hours. She looked up. Neither of them said anything at all for what he afterwards insisted was a full minute, and she always said was 4 seconds. Then Gideon took the iron key out of his coat pocket, walked across, and put it down on the open page in front of her. "I have brought this back," he said. Honora looked at it. "I do not want the key," she said. "It is yours. It has been yours since December, whatever I said in September, and I have been carrying it about London like a fool." "Gideon," she stood up, "I do not want the key. I want the door hung. Put it back on its hinges and leave it standing open, and put the key in the lock on the inside, and let anybody in this house who has business in this room walk through it. That is what I want. I have been sitting behind a curtain for 3 months because it was the only thing I could think of that could not be called breaking in." He had a speech. He had made it 4 times on the collier brig between being sick, and it had been a good speech, and it had contained the words error of judgment. He did not make it. "I was wrong," he said, "in every particular from the 10th of September. I have been wrong for 6 months, and I have known it since December, and I did not come home, and there is no excuse for that which is not also an insult, so I shall not offer one." "No," said Honora, "do not." "Then what may I do?" She looked at him for a moment with her chin up, in the shawl he had bought in Ludgate Hill, with a great deal more anxiety than he had ever spent on a horse. "You may sit down," she said, "and look at the 12-acre with me, because I think your father's ditches are in the wrong place, and I have been waiting 5 weeks to be able to say so to somebody's face." Diggins hung the door on the 6th of March. It has stood open ever since. The spring at Larkmere that year was the sort a man gets once. They rode the boundaries in the last week of March, all of it, 2 days, and she sat a horse like somebody who has learned late and refuses to be beaten by it. They held the manor court in April in the tithe barn, and she sat at his right hand with the book. And when old Frostick raised a point about a right-of-way, it was the Duchess who found the entry, in a court roll of the year 1790, in about 90 seconds. They went to church every Sunday, in the Larkmere pew, in full view of a county that had come out to look at the shipowner's daughter, and stayed to be charmed by her, which took, by Gideon's reckoning, 6 weeks. The citation was struck out on the 9th of May. His proctor's letter said only, "I told your grace it would take 10 minutes. It took 7. And in June, the wall held its first spring tide, and they walked out along it in the evening, the whole 11 rods of new work with the maram already taking, and Honora stopped in the middle and put her hand flat on the top of it the way, A woman puts a hand on a horse she has broken herself. 311 pounds 4 shillings, she said. You never did tell me where the 111 came from. No, said Honora, I never did. The light was going off the water, and there was a curlew somewhere out on the flats, and Gideon looked at his wife's face in profile against the last of it, and decided not to ask, and to this day, he does not know which of the two of them that decision was more dangerous for. He put his hand over hers on the wall. She turned it and held on, hard, and neither of them said one word. Afterwards the West Range had no further use for 2 bedchambers, and Mrs. Rook, coming up with the morning water, was heard on the stairs to remark to nobody in particular that it was about time. Fenton Vane dined at Larkmere 4 times that summer, because Gideon insisted on it, and because Honora, who was a great deal harder than her husband, said that the only thing more dangerous than a cousin at the table was a cousin who has been left off the list. He was charming. He was charming in a way that Gideon, who had known him since they were boys, found more and more difficult to sit through as the summer went on, because he had begun to be able to see the joins. You are very quiet, Your Grace, Vane said in August over the wine when Honora had gone out. One hears you have given up the whole management to her. One hears wrongly. We manage it together and she is better at it. That is a handsome thing to say. It is an accurate thing to say. Of course, Vane turned his glass by the stem, she goes to Ipswich a great deal. Gideon set down his own glass. Twice since May. 4 times, said Fenton Vane. The last on the 9th, and she took the chaise and went alone and did not stay to dine with the Pooles, who invited her. I only mention it because I should not care, in your place, to hear it first from the village. You know I say this in perfect good will. Gideon did not ask her about Ipswich. He came very near it twice, and both times he thought of a woman standing on a sea wall with her hand flat on her own work, and he let it go. He has said since that if he had asked her once, plainly, at his own table, the whole of what came afterwards would never have happened, and that this is the part he finds hardest to forgive, because it would have taken 9 words. The Michaelmas audit was held on the 30th of September in the tithe barn, as it had been held for 200 years. The rent table at one end, the long boards laid for dinner down the middle, 90 tenants and their wives and half the parish, and the harvest in and a good one, the first good one in 4 years. It was a year to the day since he had locked a door and gone down to the tide. Gideon stood up to give the audit dinner's first toast in a barn full of people who were, for the first time in his life as their landlord, genuinely glad to see him. And he had got as far as raising his glass to the health of the tenants of Larkmere when his cousin rose at the far end of the table with a folded paper in his hand and said, in the pleasantest voice in the world, "Before we drink, cousin, I am very sorry, but I think the room had better hear this." The barn went quiet the way a barn does, in stages, from the far end inward. "Cousin," said Gideon, "sit down. I would give a great deal to." Fenton Vane unfolded the paper. "This came to me on Tuesday from Bilby and Son, timber merchants, of Norwich. It is a receipt for 240 oaks off the Larkmere hangings, felled in the first week of August and carted out by the lower road. The price was £680, paid in notes on the 9th of August at Bilby's counting house in Ipswich." Somebody down the board said, "Oh," very quietly. "It is signed," said Vane, H. Larkmere. He laid it on the table. "There is no entry of it in the estate books. I have looked 3 times. 240 trees have gone off this property, and £680 has gone somewhere, and I am the last man in England who wants to be standing here saying so, and I would not be, if I had not also to say this. In December, in the account of the sea wall, there was a sum of £111 which her Grace declined to explain. It is in her own hand. The word she used was found. Gideon looked down the table at his wife. Honora had not moved. She was sitting perfectly straight with her hands in her lap, and she was looking back at him, and her face was quite white and entirely calm. And afterwards, he could remember every single thing about that half-minute except what he had been thinking during it. "Did you sign that paper?" he said. "No." "Have you sold any timber off this estate?" "No." "Were you at Bilby's counting house in Ipswich on the 9th of August?" "I was in Ipswich on the 9th of August," said Honora. "I was not at Bilby's." "Then what were you doing there?" She did not answer. "Honora," he heard his own voice go up and could not stop it. "There are 90 people in this barn. Where were you, and where did the £111 come from?" "I will tell you tonight," she said. "In your own room with the door shut, and I will tell you everything and hold nothing back, and you will have every paper I possess. Not here." "Why not here?" "Because it is not only mine to tell, and because a thing said in this barn tonight will be in Woodbridge by Friday, and because you are not asking me, Gideon. You are asking me in front of 90 people so that they can watch me answer." And that was true, and he knew it was true, and it was precisely because he knew it that he did the thing he did. "Give me the key," said the Duke of Larkmere. The silence in that barn had teeth. Down at the tenant's end, Samuel Q. put both hands on the boards and began to stand up. Honora turned her head half an inch and looked at him, and Q stopped, and sat, and put his hands under the table. And Gideon understood, watching it, that his wife had just refused the only defense in the room, and had done it in order to protect a tenant from his landlord. She took the estate office key out of the pocket at her waist. She stood up. She walked the length of the boards with every face turning after her, and she put the key down on the table in front of her husband, on top of the timber receipt, without a sound, and she stood there a moment. "You locked it once," she said, "before you knew me, that I understood." Then she went out down the length of the barn, and through the doors into the dark. Fenton Vane said something about it being a wretched business, and that of course nothing was proved. Gideon did not hear it. He has no clear memory of the rest of that evening at all, except that somebody had to be got to finish the toast, and that it was Vane who did it. She did not leave that night, which he had half expected and wholly deserved. She stayed 3 days. In 3 days Honora went through every household and estate account she had touched in 12 months and left them balanced to the farthing, with a statement of 41 pages on the estate table. The wall, the leases, the abatements, the roofs, the orchard, the widow Cobbled's cart, every shilling in and out, signed and dated. On the top sheet. Everything I have done at Larkmere is in these pages. There is one thing that is not, and it is not in them because I gave my word to another person. If it is ever proved to you by somebody who is not me, you will find it was not a thing done against you. She would not see him. He stood outside her door on the second night for 11 minutes with his hand up to knock. On the morning of the 3rd of October, in rain, the Duchess of Larkmere walked out of the front door with one corded box, and refused the chaise, and refused the cart, and refused Mrs. Rook, who wept in the hall, and went down the drive on foot to meet the Ipswich coach on the turnpike 2 miles off, with the grey shawl over her head. Gideon watched her from the window of the estate office, with the door standing open behind him, and the key in the lock on the inside. He went after her on the 5th. It took him a day to find the house in Ipswich, a respectable widow's, in a street behind the Corn Exchange, and the maid took his name up, and he stood in a hallway with his hat in his hands like a man come about a place, and the answer came down on a half sheet. I am well. I am not in want of anything, and I will not take money from you while this stands over me. Do not come again yet. If you take me back now, on nothing but your own good nature, you will half wonder about the 9th of August for the rest of your life, and you will be too kind to say so, and I will know it every day. I have been a poor man's daughter, and I can bear a great deal, but I will not be borne with. Let it be proved. Then come and ask me again, and I will say yes before you have finished the sentence. Age. He rode back to Larkmere and did the only useful thing he had done in a fortnight. He wrote to Bilby and son of Norwich himself, and to Prewitt, and to the sheriff's officer, and he set about proving it. It was slow. It was slow because Bilby's had been paid in notes and had no clerk who could swear to the woman, and because the felling had been done by men out of Norfolk who had gone home, and because a duke asking questions about his own timber is a duke, the whole county is watching. He got one fact in 5 weeks, and it was this: the oaks had been carted out by the lower road, and the lower road does not touch the Larkmere hangings at all. It comes past the Dower House. He was still deciding what to do with that when, on the 11th of November, a man came up the drive from Ipswich with a formal notice. The holder of the bond of 1818, secured upon the marsh land, the home farm and the greater part of the park of Larkmere, gave notice of intention to foreclose, and required the sum of £14,000 within 30 days, and desired the presence of His Grace the Duke of Larkmere at the office of Mr. Prewitt, in Ipswich, on the 20th instant, when the holder would attend in person. Gideon read it twice and laughed, and it was not the laugh from the coffee-house. He has had it all along, he said, 14 months, and I gave it to him. Mr. Prewitt's office in Ipswich was up 2 flights over a saddler's, and smelled of leather and sealing wax, and Gideon arrived on the 20th of November, having slept about 4 hours in 9 days. Is he here? Is who here, your grace? My cousin, the holder. The holder is here, said Prewitt, and will come in when I ring. Will your grace sit down first, because I have a good deal to read, and it will go faster if you are sitting. Gideon sat down. Prewitt put on his spectacles. On the 2nd of December of last year, he said, the syndicate that held the Larkmere bond resolved to be rid of it. Their reasons were 3. The marsh land was under salt water. The title to the estate was in suit in the ecclesiastical court, with a fair chance of the whole thing changing hands, and the interest had been paid slowly for 6 years. He turned a leaf. A bond of £14,000 in those circumstances is not worth £14,000. They were prepared to sell the whole security for £3,000, and to whoever came first with the money. And my cousin came first. Mr. Vane came first. Mr. Vane offered £2,500 on the 8th of December and asked for 6 weeks to find it. Prewitt looked up over the spectacles. On the 21st of December, a person put £3,000 on the table and took the assignment the same afternoon, and the syndicate never wrote to Mr. Vane again, and Mr. Vane has spent 11 months believing the sale fell through. £3,000, said Gideon. In December, nobody within 40 miles of me had £3,000 in December. Nobody had, Prewitt agreed. It was made up. He drew a paper across. £2,400 was raised by the sale of the following: a marriage portion of £900, settled on Miss Honora Bligg by her mother in the year 19 and untouched since. 1 undivided 1/8 share in the brig fair return of Lowestoft, sold at Yarmouth for 1100. A set of table plate, a pearl necklace and 2 rings, sold at Ipswich for 394. And the residue in cash, being everything the lady had in the world down to 11 shillings. The room had gone a long way off. And the other 600, said Gideon. Pruitt took off his spectacles. The other 600, he said, was subscribed by 12 tenants of the Larkmere estate. Samuel Q put in 140, which was his whole savings and his wife's. Frostick put in 80. The widow Cobbold put in £9 in a stocking and would not be refused, and I have it entered as £9, because she said if I made it 10 she would know I had pitied her. Gideon put his hand over his eyes. They knew, he said. Q knew. He stood up in that barn. He knew, and he sat down when she told him to, because she had every one of them under a promise. Your Grace will see why. If the bond had failed, if the court had set your marriage aside, or if the marsh had gone again, 12 men would have been ruined for meddling in their landlord's affairs, and the county would have said so for 30 years. And if it succeeded, they were tenants who had bought a hold over the man who could turn them out at Michaelmas. Pruitt folded his hands. She would not have them named until it was safe. That is the whole of it. She gave her word in a barn in December with her hand on Q's Bible, and she kept it in front of 90 people on the 30th of September, and she kept it in this office when I begged her on my knees to let me write to you. The 9th of August, Gideon said, was the day she paid the last installment on the assignment and took the deed out of my hands into her own. She was in this room from 11 until 2. My clerk and I can both swear to it, and Bilby's counting house is a quarter of a mile off, and she has never in her life set foot in it. Gideon sat still for a while. Ring the bell, he said. Honora came in with her bonnet still on. She was thinner. That was the first thing, and it went into him like a splinter. She had the gray shawl with the green stripe over her arm, and she stopped just inside the door as though the room had a line drawn across it. You have been keeping my house out of my cousin's hands with your mother's pearls, said Gideon, since the 21st of December. And I asked you where the money came from in front of 90 people, and when you would not tell me, I took the key back off you across a table. Yes, said Honora. Why did you not simply tell me in December? I would have. You would have stopped it. She said it without heat. In September you told me in a passage that I had not bought the land, that nobody buys the land, and that it was not for sale and never had been. You meant it kindly, in your way. You meant that Larkmere is not a thing a wife brings money to. Her chin came up. And in December there was a suit in the ecclesiastical court to say that I was not your wife at all. If that suit had gone against you, every penny I put in would have gone straight to Fenton Vane along with the marsh. It had to be in my name. It had to be quiet. And once the 12 of them had put their savings in beside mine, it was not my secret any more, and I do not break my word to a man like Samuel Q, because it has become inconvenient to me. And the foreclosure notice. Mine, I told Mr. Pruitt to serve it in the proper form and to require the holder to attend in person. For the first time, something moved in her face. I gave my word not to tell you. I did not give my word not to make you come and look. Gideon got up. I have one thing to say, and then I will go away again if you tell me to, he said. The oaks were carted out by the lower road. The lower road does not go within half a mile of the Larkmere hangings. It goes past the Dower House. Honora's eyes changed. Say that again. The lower road, said Gideon, goes past the Dower House hangar, which my cousin holds of me on a lease of my father's, and where there were 240 standing oaks in June, and where there are now 240 stumps. Pruitt's man counted them on Tuesday. There was a silence. Then he did not only forge my hand, Honora said slowly. He sold your trees. He sold my trees, put your name to the paper, and read it out at my own audit dinner. Gideon looked down at his hat and found that his hands were entirely steady, which surprised him. Mr. Prewitt, what do I need? Prewitt was already writing. Bilby's clerk, who took the notes and saw the woman who signed and who has told my man twice that she was short and fair. Her grace is neither. The numbers of the Norwich notes, which Bilby's have, and which the Ipswich Bank will trace over its own counter. The carter who moved the timber, whose name is Runnacles and who is at Halesworth, and a magistrate. How long? 9 days, 10. Then be so good, said the Duke of Larkmere, as to summon every tenant on my land to the tithe barn on the 29th of November, and my cousin with them, and Bilby's clerk and the carter and the sheriff's officer, and put it about the county that anybody who wishes to come may come. He turned round. Madam, he said, will you sit at the head of that table with me? No, said Honora. No. No, she said. You will sit at the head of it, and you will say what wants saying, and you will say it standing up in front of every person who watched me walk out of that barn. And then I will come in. The tithe barn was fuller on the 29th of November than it had been on the 30th of September, because a county that will come out for a dinner will run for a reckoning. Fenton Vane came. Gideon had wondered whether he would, and understood, watching him walk in and take a seat halfway down with his gloves in his hand, that a man of his kind has no choice. Staying away would have been the first confession. Mr. Prewitt did it, and did it flatly, in the voice of a man reading a bill of lading, which was much the worst way it could have been done. He read Bilby's day book. He put up Bilby's clerk, a young man in a green coat who was frightened of the room and told the truth anyway. That the person who had signed H. Larkmere at his counter on the 9th of August had been a short, fair woman of about 40, hired for the errand, whom he had never seen before or since, and that he would know her again, and that her grace, whom he could see quite well from where he stood, was not she. He put up Runnacles the carter of Halesworth, who had moved the timber over 4 days with 2 wagons, and who was asked one question, "Where did you load?" and gave one answer. "Off the Dower House hanger, sir, by the lower road. There ain't no other way out of it." He read the numbers of 9 Norwich bank notes, and where each of them had been paid over a counter in Ipswich, and whose endorsement was on the back of 4. And by the time he reached the 4th, the room had stopped making any noise at all. Then Gideon stood up. "I am not going to talk about my cousin," he said. "There is a magistrate at the end of this table, and it is his business now, and it will be done properly and in the king's name and not in this barn." He put his hat down on the boards in front of him, because his hands would not be still. "I am going to talk about what I did on the 30th of September, on this spot, in front of most of you." Nobody moved. 14 months ago, I locked the estate office door and put the key in my pocket and went down to the tide. I told my wife she had the house and £50 a quarter, and that she had not bought the land. I said that nobody buys the land. And then I stayed away 6 months while the wall went in the November gale, and it was closed without me, in 11 days, in the wet, by Samuel Q. and Frostick and 8 other men who took no wage, and by a woman out of Lowestoft who had been in this county 9 weeks. He heard his own voice thicken and stopped and let it. On the 30th of September, I stood here and asked her, in front of all of you, to account for £111, and when she would not do it in public, I took the estate key back off her across this table. She walked out of that door in the rain 3 days later on foot, and would not take the cart. He picked the paper up off the boards. "This is the bond on Larkmere. £14,000, secured on the marsh, the home farm and most of the park, borrowed by my father in the year 18 and never touched since. Mr. Vane was buying it. He had it agreed at 2,500 in 6 weeks to find the money, and if he had found it, he could have had this estate out from under me in a bad harvest without ever going near a court." He turned the paper round so that they could see the seal. "On the 21st of December it was bought over his head for £3,000. 2,400 of it was my wife's, her mother's marriage portion, her share in her father's brig, her mother's pearls, her plate, and every shilling she owned down to 11 of them. The other 600 was subscribed by 12 tenants of this estate: Samuel Q, £140, Amos Frostick, 80. The widow cobbled £9 out of a stocking, and she would not let it be called 10. The noise the barn made then was not a cheer. It was lower than that, and longer, and Gideon stood in it with his hat off. They were all of them under her promise not to be named, because if it had gone wrong they would have been ruined for meddling, and because she would not have her landlord know which of his tenants held paper on his land. She kept that promise standing where I am standing, with me asking her in front of you. I have had a fortnight to think about what kind of woman does that, and I have not got to the bottom of it yet." He looked down the length of the boards to the barn doors. "I said nobody buys the land," said the Duke of Larkmere. "I was wrong. She bought it. She bought it when it was worth nothing and the marsh was salt, and there was a suit in London to say she was not even my wife, and she has held it for 11 months and never once used it, and she could have turned me off my own ground any day since Christmas, and instead she sent me a bill for the sea wall." And he stood back from the table. Honora came in through the barn doors with the gray shawl over her arm, and walked the whole length of it, past 90 people who were on their feet by the time she was a third of the way down, past Samuel Q, who was crying quite openly and not troubling to hide it, and did not stop until she reached her husband. "Well," she said, in a voice that carried about 6 feet, "you did it standing up." "You said to." "I did." Her mouth was not steady. "Ask me the other thing." He asked her. He did not get to the end of the sentence. "That was 4 years ago. Fenton Vane was committed at the assizes in the spring, and the estate has not heard of him since, and Gideon pays an allowance to his aunt at Bath and does not discuss it. The 12 were paid back at Lady Day with 5%, out of the rents, and every one of them holds a lease for 3 lives, drawn by Pruitt and signed at the Manor Court, with the whole parish looking on. Samuel Q has the 40 acres his grandfather had, on paper at last. The widow Cobbled's £9 came back as £9.10, and she disputed the 10 shillings for an hour and a half, and then bought a clock with it. The bond was never cancelled. It is in a japanned box in the estate office with the deeds, and any tenant on the property may ask to see it, and 3 or 4 ask every year, mostly to show it to a son. The marsh took 4 summers to sweeten, and is now the best of the low grazing. There are 240 young oaks on the Dower House hanger, put in the winter after the assizes, and Honora will not have them thinned. The estate office door is hung and stands open. The key is in the lock on the inside, and it stays there, and Mrs. Rook dusts round it and has never once been asked to move it. They keep the audit dinner on the 30th of September, which some people thought strange, and neither of them has ever explained it. The Duchess sits at the head of the rent table with the great book, because she is faster in it than her husband, and everybody in 3 parishes knows it. There is a small pair of boots by the estate office door most mornings, and a good deal of argument in that house about ditches, and a shawl of gray silk with a green stripe which has been mended twice and will not be replaced. On fine evenings they walk out along the sea wall, the whole 11 rods of new work and the old work beyond it, and stop in the middle where the marram is thick now, and she puts her hand flat on the top of it. And the Duke of Larkmere, who once locked a door and sailed for London on a falling tide, stands beside his wife on ground that she bought and he nearly lost, and puts his hand over hers and holds on.